Welcome to Leading Dragons. This is number 3 of the series Leadership During the Corona Times. And hello, Casey from Hawaii. How are you?
Hey, doing great and having a nice wet day on the Big Island, but spring is coming, which is good.
Yeah, spring is coming, and over here in Switzerland, that means that there's very little snow left, and the trees are budding all over the place.
Hmm.
So,
That's good stuff.
and you know, and I was thinking, Casey, it would be nice with our 12 hours difference. How about if next time we swap them over? So I'll start fresh and early like you do every time, 9 o'clock, not 9 a.m. my time and 9 p.m. your time.
Yeah, it's kind of nice working from Hawaii because that time zone difference works really well because it allows people to work in the afternoons and the evenings with me, which is unusual for a lot of
Yeah,
teachers. So,
yeah.
but it does flip, but it can be a problem also.
No, but I'm good so far. So good. Okay. So in the past, when we started this series at the start of the year, we've in the previous series we talked about what lies ahead. And we talked about the key pivot points. You sort of unraveled those over the next decade. And in part 2, we talked about stepping aside of the chaos and the importance of pausing and repositioning ourselves as leading dragons.
Hmm.
And before I pressed the record button, Casey, I said to you, yeah, you know, my gut's telling me I'd like to talk about energy. Um, because everything is energy. Isn't that what Nikola Tesla said? He said, if you want to understand the universe, um, check into the energy, frequency, and vibrations of everything around us. So
Hmm.
this session is about making new choices and creating a new vision. And naturally, the first thing that comes to mind is, well, doesn't that all depend on our state, our energetic state, our somatic state, our body state, our psychological state? But doesn't that still all come back down to where we are operating from? If we're operating from a place of fear, or as a leading dragon, are we operating from a place of faith, which is naturally higher vibrational? So that's the introduction to the topic. Casey, um, shall we just dive in now and start with the first part, which is around how to check our own temperature, so to speak, and how we can recognize our energy frequency.
Okay, so let's dive into that. Energy is the capacity to do action. I used to be a physicist and we work with energy and matter. And yes, energy and mass are interchangeable, but they are different manifestations of how to work with reality, you could say, okay? And when people talk about energy, we use the word overloaded and we don't understand what we're talking about. And it drives me crazy, both as a spiritual teacher and a physicist, that people try to use the word energy to cover very different ideas, which
Mm-hmm.
then causes a lot of conflict, okay? And it turns out, let's redefine things for a few seconds. When we say energy, we're talking about the capacity to perform action. So if I put gasoline in the car, and I burn the gasoline, the act of burning, combusting creates motion, and it creates a capacity to do work. Okay, so that's physical energy. Okay, spiritual energy is a little different. Spiritual energy is empathy, emotions, the ability to perceive and interact with the world, which is a little bit different. So you have to treat that a little differently and use both sides of that equation, you could say. Now, the other mix that people miss when talking about energy is, okay, we are mind, body, spirit. The body is mass, the body is our physical form. Our mind represents our stories. And what stories represent are not physical constructs, they're
Hmm.
energetic constructs. And so when we're working with energy, we're working with our stories more than we realize. So a lot of energy work in business, a lot of energy work in being a leader is learning how to energize, how to give motion to a story, how to back the story up. It's not enough just to rebrand your business. You have to build energy behind that. You have to support that because otherwise it won't have enough energy to keep it going. That's the thing about stories. Stories need energy to keep alive.
Hmm. So when you say that stories are energetic constructs, do you mean, could I say, for example, so what I'm telling myself, so my beliefs and my, especially my self-limiting beliefs, is that what you're saying? So if I keep sort of replaying them in my head, then indeed I'm giving them energy, and that is then determining my energetic frequency. Would you say that?
Yes, I tend not to use words frequency and resonance because they get so misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk too spiritually, then people go, oh, you're woo-woo, and they discount the important truths about how you use energy to keep your story strong. And so as a physicist and as a spiritual teacher, I've learned to change my language a little differently to make it more accessible to everyone. So one of the truths is when you use words, when you use language, there's energy behind those words. There's energy behind the language. And you have to be careful to use the language in such a way that whether you're talking to someone who's literal or you're talking to someone who's expansive, you can bridge the differences and not lose them in misperceptions. So a lot of the language work takes energy too, because you have to take time to recognize how to modify the language to fit the audience and fit the goals you're working towards. So
Which is often the other way around. When you work inside an organization, there's a lot of corporate jargon that each one of us need to adopt and
mhm,
use as we express ourselves. So
right.
what are we doing with our energy when we're doing this?
Well, there's a lot going on. I worked in the largest corporations in the world, like Boeing, and also I worked in the federal government in the United States, right? And the language I use has energy behind it. And then the paradigm shifts and all this stuff. And you know what? It's kind of bullshit at a certain point because they're not really putting the energy they're putting behind the words. They're just using it to feel good rather than being constructive with it.
Mm.
And so you have to be careful because the language takes a lot of energy and people get so caught up in the language you're using, they end up doing nothing in real life. So all the energy is going into the language and no energy is going into the actual action to build something. And I can't tell you how many times I saw that in corporate America or the government where everyone's spinning energy in the language to feel good, rah, rah, and look what we're doing, total
Yeah.
control management and all this type of crap.
Mm.
And all the energy is going into language, but no energy is going into actual action. No energy is actually going to bringing people together in a physical way to build something. All the energy, it's good to feel good, but you have to do something with that.
And that resonates so much. That kind of summarizes my, yeah, most of my corporate experience and also working in international organizations. And I
Mm-hmm,
remember when um, I was about 27, 28, and I was working as one of the senior buyers for the construction of the new particle accelerator for CERN, the European Centre
mm-hmm,
for Nuclear Research. And so, as you can imagine, it was a fairly already exposed role, particularly for my age and experience. But I passionately sort of dived into it and enjoyed working on these contracts and construing these calls for tender for equipment that didn't exist up to date, right? And and I remember my manager telling me, yeah, but you know, Deborah, the thing is you can't just be sitting at your desk and working away. you need to be also spending 50% of your time telling others what you're doing and selling, inside what the work that you're doing, because your added value otherwise is just going to stay within the four walls. So even
And
back
that's
then, I
energy.
didn't. Sorry?
And that's energy, because if you kept yourself locked in, you're not connecting out, you're not building up a base to work together, and
Yeah.
you're not sharing a common vision, which then everyone does their own thing and the work doesn't add up. So yes, good example.
Mm. So what can we do? And before we go into, because I'd like to go into choices and behaviors and conversations that drastically change depending on what space we're operating from, whether we are operating from a space of fear or we are operating from a more expanded space of faith and courage. So how can we check in and how can we check into our energy, our operating energy, and what can we do to shift it to naturally hopefully uplift it?
Okay, so let's talk about some of the things you mentioned. First thing, fear. What does fear represent? Fear represents a negative story, a story that can go wrong. Now remember what I said, stories are energetic constructs. So if you have a story that has negative consequences and you're giving it energy, it means it's diminishing what you're building. So fear, when not properly channeled, undercuts the process of building out. So when you have something that stirs up fear, you have to look at it very quickly, identify what negative is in play. Is it appropriate? If it's appropriate, you put it under, you get some controls in place to deal with that fear, and then you release it, because otherwise you're wasting energy in something that's undercutting you. So you don't ignore fears in a business sense. You actually address them up front, you come up with a plan, and you minimize the risk of that fear, but then you remove it off to the side. So again,
Yeah,
as an engineer, go ahead.
it's like what we were talking about in our last session, that fear can be, we can use fear as a data source because it's telling us something.
Mm-hmm.
So not to ignore it, but to sit with it, figure out, determine what it's trying to tell us, but then, like you say, then move through it.
Mm-hmm. So let's use fear as an example now. As an engineer from Boeing, when you're building something, a fear is you use the fears to identify the risks. Okay, so you can have a fear that the software doesn't quite work, and the engineers of Boeing did warn the management, hey, there's a problem here. And the management ignored the fear. They didn't put proper boundaries in play there. And so as a result, they introduced a lot of problems into the product, and now we see the modern results of that. 737 Maxes crash because they didn't address the fears
Mm-hmm.
that the engineers. So you can't ignore fears. You have to actually document them, understand what they are, and then use them constructively. So then you're turning a negative energy into a positive energy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the trap is the more energy you put into fears, the more time you're wasting, and you can't build a product. If you only have fear, if you only document fears, you never build a product.
Yeah.
I've been on projects like that too, where everyone keeps listing out the fears to the point that no one can move ahead. And so
Paralysis.
paralysis, fear paralysis. It happens all the time in business. And so you have this really interesting equation. You have to document the fears and use them, but you can't over document them because it stops you too.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to recognize why fear is this negative energy. You document it and turn it into positive energy, and you build a base that you could build from slowly but surely, but you don't overdo it. And there's always people who are going to be action, and they learn from mistakes and then grow from the mistakes. And then people who try to prevent mistakes, and they have different places in building a story. Sometimes we need the risk taker to go out to go through something.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give you an example from the Civil War in America. Um, there was this long train of the army winding its way down to the South. It's when the North finally got their act together and they began to go into the South to bring the war to the South. And there was this army train that was literally tens of miles long, winding its way, and it stopped. And this is when Custer was a colonel, and he was way back at the back, and he's like, what the hell's going on here? And so he rides up to the front of the line, and all the generals are stopped at this little river. And they all have this fear that the river is too deep. And they're going, well, what are we going to do? And how are we going to get through this river? And if it's too deep, what do we do? And they're arguing over how deep this thing is. And Custard looks at this and goes, what? This is bullshit. He rides out into the middle of the river. He goes, sirs, I reckon it's this deep. And he showed, because he's in the river, can we go now? And so sometimes you need action to build upon. And that's energy. Sometimes you need to be smart, because if you don't, you can't build a bridge that can withstand the stresses over time. So there's a dance in this. And we have to always remember there is a dance. And now if you think about it, what did I just say? That dance is an energetic process too. And in corporations and business, people forget to dance. They forget to take both the fear and the positives and build it into something. They forget to take the active actions and take the risks with the passive risk prevention techniques. You need to dance between both sides, and that takes energy to do. And most people don't do that. And so in your team, you're going to need some risk takers, and in your team, you're going to need some engineers who are practical in doing quality control management. You need both.
Yeah. No,
and the successful products merge those two aspects energetically together.
Yeah.
They don't put one side down or the other side down. They actually bring both sides to the table. And that's another aspect of energy work, communication, because communication takes energy too. And so lots of times in modern management, the communication is cut off. And when you cut off that energy of the communication, you don't allow your employees to talk. You don't allow the whistleblowers to release the bad information that you can use to actually make things better. If you shut down the communication, you're shutting your energy down. That's inflammation, and you're causing a problem for your business or your organization or your vision.
But oftentimes, even if the intention is there, and I'm going to give an example of, the bank, the private bank, you're sitting at the table with regulatory compliance and with the front office. Even if the intention is there, right, okay, we're going to work together on this project. I mean, even the two of them, they have different languages. And so regulatory compliance are there to mitigate the risk and keep everything under control. And I think this is where I'd like to break through those labels and go back to the human aspect of, okay, well, you're this and I'm that. You're regulatory compliance and I'm front office, I'm business development. It's like, oh, but if we stay in our spheres of expertise, can we, and so oftentimes, how often have you, Casey, left a meeting room where nothing got decided upon, and it was just like not a check, like a checkmate. Nobody was budging, nobody was shifting. And it's like, okay, well, and then somebody made up some lame excuse like, oh, Mr. X is not here, but they're on holiday, they'll be back next week. So how about if we just postpone the meeting and then we'll be able to make the decision. And then the next, you know what I mean? So it's like, so this is where, I'd like to break through those labels of, what our purpose is. Oh, whether you're regulatory compliance over here, or whether you're, business development over here, whether you're an engineer over here, or whether you're a risk taker over there. And it's like, this is the thing, it's like this duality. And you talk about dancing. Now, how can we as leading dragons, how can we break that pattern and create a breakthrough in the conversations and transform those conversations so that we're actually moving forward together.
And there comes energy management and story management. In other words, in companies, they think all they need to do is rebrand something. They think all they need to do is create a story and everyone will follow it. And that is not the case. You need a person in the mix who is a bard, who is a storyteller, who is able to bridge the differences in different people's story and rebrand it as a new story that they can share together. And you need that active, energetic story creation, because you can't just give your workers a story and expect they're going to follow it. In fact, your workers have a very different story than you think they do. Your worker's story isn't, oh, I'm going to build the best airplane. Oh, I'm going to build the best health tracking system. Lots of times your worker story is, I need this paycheck to survive. And so if you give them this shiny new story that makes the company look better, they're not necessarily going to care, because their story is they're trying to survive in these times. And so now you have to actually bridge the difference, say, hey, to survive, we need to do this together. And you need to create a whole new story that brings people into the process again. And that's energy management, if you think about it, because you're actually managing people's energy. Then you add on top of it, if you're draining your workers' energy for your company's profit, then your workers don't have the energy to complete the story you're trying to get them to complete. And so part of it is giving back too, so they can give in return. And all that mix is a question of, how do you manage your company's energy? How do you manage your company's expectations? How do you manage the stories in play and merge them together? And so as a dragon leader, one of our goals is to be able to be aware of those energies in play, those stories in play, because stories are energetic constructs, and help bring them together again.
So, and I'd like to go back to that the importance around words and language that we use, because, say for example, you've got a leader who, who's really looking to integrate, conscious leadership into their style. And so they bring the team in on the every Monday morning, and they do check-in. Okay, let's go around the table, round robin, let's do some check-in. So, and then it's like, okay, so I've ticked that box. Now let's get into business. And it's all of a sudden the conscious leadership piece is like dropped. That's it. I've ticked that box, the check-in box. Now I'm not vaguely interested in what you guys have got to say, but we're late on this task or whatever it is. And so energy management, the reason I'm saying this is because it's about curiosity. Isn't it about curiosity? So this goes beyond doing the check-in every Monday morning with your team, or asking the questions, or tailoring your language so that it sounds good.
Yes, there's several aspects I need to address from what you just stated. Okay, aspect number one, painting by the numbers. So what you just said is an organization that's painting by numbers. They're doing everything correct. They've gotten a template. They're following the best advice. But all that is painting by the numbers. And if I have a drawing that's painting by the numbers versus a drawing that I can craft uniquely for my situation, which one are you going to buy? You're always going to buy the handcrafted one that's been expressed in a beautiful manner, not the one that's, hey, look, they're painting by the numbers, and look, the paint's over going into lines. Yeah, it looks okay, but still painting by the numbers. It's not really that good of a system, it turns out.
Yeah.
And so you waste a lot of time painting by numbers, a lot of unnecessary meanings, a lot of peacocking, a lot of ego. And that doesn't work. And again, if you're going to create an actual something that's beautiful, that it breaks the mold and makes something new in this new time, you have to be willing to be creative.
Yeah.
And again, it takes that spark to pull the people together to be able to share that vision, to re-change the language, to come together to do that. Now, the second aspect of that is you have people who are literal, and you have people who are more inventive in the way they use language, expansive, and they both have their place. You have to be literal if you're a finance person, finance people, or if you're epidemiologists, very literal, okay? I worked and built finance systems. I built epidemiological disease tracking systems. And those particular populations are very literal. and you have to work with that box because they can't get out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
Your job isn't to take them out of the box. Your job is to be the person outside the box to show them what else is outside the world so you can integrate that box into the bigger project.
Mm-hmm.
And that's powerful. And then you have the people who are more expansive. And the trouble with being more expansive is you don't get anything done either because you're too high in the clouds. You need the literal to build the damn car engine.
Yeah.
The high in the clouds gives you the new technology and new ways to do something exciting. And the literal gives you the tools to build something more structured. You need both sides of that. And you need someone to bridge the difference. And oftentimes I was a person who had to go in to do that because the literal side will always be fighting and not do the things required to go the extra mile to make it actually a good product. And so that's a dance. And without someone who understands the language of both sides, who can both be literal and expansive, who can be a poet, but also can be rational at times, to bridge the difference, you tend to get chaos. And one side will win out, and then you get a skewing because you need both sides to have the final successful product. So the dragon leader is someone who could bridge those sides and bring them together.
Which seems to be yet a skill to be harnessed by the majority of organizational leaders.
Yes, because on average, the visionary companies will be 5%. They'll make the bigger bucks, but most of the money is still going to be in the more literal boxes who meet expectations just enough to get by. That's actually a solid business model. Each of them are solid business models, and turns out in the middle is a harder place to be.
So let's talk about the middle for a second, because this is where we can talk about creating a new vision. And okay, so repositioning, like we talked about last time, and creating that new, making new choices and stepping into exploring in conversations, brainstorming, and aligning into a new vision. And that demands thinking outside the box, new thinking, new patterns of thinking. So how could we connect that to the energy in the room, and what needs to be in place in order to create a new vision, a collective vision, a synopia, so that we feel that, okay, so that's it, we're back in business, we're all in this together, and then we get this collective energy rush to move into something new.
Okay, so I'm going to say another way of looking at this. Time is money. So money is energy. Okay, so now it comes down to money in some aspects of this. Now, being high, we tend to not think about the money. We tend to think expansively. And when we're in the box, we tend to think about cutting the money down. So there's, in that middle spot, the problem comes down to the energy is money. In fact, Bitcoin is generated by energy to generate the Bitcoin. So now in modern cryptocurrency, energy and money are directly linked, it turns out. Okay, so it comes down to an interesting truth. The profit is part of the problem, because with profit in play, profit drains energy. Profit is a parasite. And so the more you focus on the profit, the more you're taking away from the construction process in the middle, and the less you get to build. So the bigger the profit, the less you get to build. Trouble is, in modern, we're a profit-based society, so people are maximizing profit. So that's part of the problem, is the way the balance of profit versus product come into conflict. And that is energy management too, to manage the energy between the profit ratio versus the product quality. So there is a large part of the problem. Now, so if you remove the profit out to minimize the parasitic effect of over parasizing the product for profit, you can build a better product, okay? There's a limit what you can do, because Wall Street says maximize profit. The reason Boeing crashed so badly, because pre-Wall Street, it wasn't about the profit, it was about the product, and they built good products. Once Wall Street took over the company, which it did in the mid-90s, The profit was so important, it destroyed the product quality. So now they're in trouble. So that profit is the biggest problem in energy because it's an energy drain. Working with the right level of profit relative to product is the key here. And we need both sides now to manage that because the finance people are keeping the profit and the money balanced to be reasonable, while the high visionary people are giving the extra flair to make it a true product that people truly want. And see, if the visionaries were given unlimited budget, they would never build anything because they would always be changing. They would always be trying to make it more expansive, and you wouldn't have a product because the product needs definition.
Yeah.
So there is a meeting point in the middle.
Mm.
And ironically, that meeting point is largely determined by the money. And that is an energetic push process and how you balance out that equation.
But this goes
And
back
the story.
to, yeah, so this goes back to managing expectations. So
It does actually.
if we're to say, right, okay, here's your budget to build for this, for whatever service or product, here's your budget. Okay. We've got to, even just that in itself is managing energy. So you've got a budget so that you can allocate resources to whatever it is, whether you're building an engine or whether you are designing and developing a training course, so a service. At the end of the day, I'm just wondering, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? And are we, if we were not to put the budget first, which then determines the route that we're going to take, and instead, if we were supposed to flip that on its head and go, no, we're going to start with energy management, is that, I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there. Never thought of that before. Is that possible?
Okay. Yes, it is. And in modern software development, it gives us a clue on some of the keys to this. Evolution. When we build that product or that new story or what we are creating in that middle place, we don't want to create a final product. What we want to create, what comes first is the chicken or the egg, actually. The egg hatches into a chick. You don't hatch the egg into a rooster. You don't hatch the egg into a hen. If you do that, your product's going to fail because you're trying to do too much too fast. And you don't work out the kinks. You need to start with that damn chick. And that chick, the story of the chick, we may have an idea of what the story looks like, but the truth is we can evolve the story into multiple directions over time. And as it evolves, we can make it more and more beautiful, more and more cohesive. And so we have to factor in that process of evolution as a manager. So a dragon manager is doing multiple things. One of the things the dragon manager is doing is bridging the difference between vision and literal. And it can talk both languages and bring the team to the center. The other thing that dragon leader is doing is understanding the power of money and energy so that you could build a chick, which can evolve into the rooster or the hen or even the velociraptor. In other words, it can evolve. And that's a tricky thing to do, to build a product or a team or a corporate structure that can truly evolve. Because people want final products done.
Yeah.
So there is an interesting middle ground that the dragon leader can fall into, because that ability to bridge worlds, which is storytelling now, is a rare talent.
So finding that middle ground. So we're going back to creating that new vision. And Casey, that was really a beautiful kind of summary that you did. So how a leading dragon, the leading dragon's role in innovative designing and innovative thinking is to bring everybody to a middle ground and to be able to manage the team's energy from that middle ground. So obviously you've got the extremes, whether it's the visionary or what did you call them? The literal.
The literal.
The literal. So bringing them together. So really leveraging the diversity in the room.
Yes.
and as well as a beautiful product and the financial resources that we have and are expecting as profit, and bringing them two together as well, and creating kind of like a balance,
Exactly.
where we'd then be able to, see some organic energy, uh, which would then feed into that new vision. Is that right?
Hmm.
I kind of like some.
Exactly right. Now let's look at this for a second. It makes a difference where you go to work. Because let's say, for the sake of argument, 80% of the companies are more literal, much more tight on the money side.
Hmm.
And that's the majority where companies are, 80% there. Then you have the more 10%, the visionary companies that can get away with being visionary. But then you have the middle 5-10%, which can do both. Apple, Tesla, the companies that can actually do both. Now, keep in mind, Apple and Tesla, even though they have a lot of vision and they're doing a lot of visionary type of work, they're actually more bean counter than you realize at times. They actually also control their finances really tightly.
Hmm.
They're managing both sides pretty well. And when you do that, you can get a Tesla where you're building rocket ships to Mars at the same time of building a world-class electric car and other products. So you can do that. There are a lot of companies in the middle. And so if you're a dragon, be aware, look for that middle spot and make sure you match in personality. So when you go in, because there's different ways to hold this middle ground. There's not just one style of holding it. And so you have to match your sweet spot in there, match the company's culture, because culture is story and that is energetic. So you want to resonate with their culture, because you can't drag a culture into something new. It will resist and then it will push you out. You're not going into these companies to save them. You're going into these companies to be part of them, to build something in this evolutionary style. But it only works if that's what they want to do. If they want a bean count, no, you're always going to get undercut and you won't make it. If they're only going to be visionary, no, they're never going to land enough to build the product.
Hmm.
So part of our challenge as a dragon is to spot these middle spots, which are actually appropriate for this style of approach. So you have to interview your company as much as they interview you. You have to match to them. And a lot of companies will say, we want the vision, but no, in the end, the action is going to say they want the beans. They want the precise counts.
Hmm.
You have to listen to the words, and then if the actions don't back their words, if they don't give energy to their words, you're screwed.
Yeah. And that goes back to what we were saying last time as well about repositioning. Once you've evaluated, are you in a good spot, or is it actually time to leave because you are noticing that there's inconsistent behavior with, what's on the paper. So that goes back. Wow, wonderful. I don't know. I just find that we kind of wrapped up nicely this subject of today about new
Perfect.
choices and creating a new vision. And I don't know, Casey, if there's anything that you'd like to add to wrap up, but I think you've said it absolutely beautifully and so succinctly.
I think energy management is a critical aspect to being a dragon leader. But because energy management is overloaded with so many negative connotations, you have to be careful how you use your language, how you build up the energetic support of the stories, how you take time to bring people in alignment, because modern times right now, people are more polarized than ever. So our jobs are even harder as the polarization is become more extreme. But just because it's more extreme, there's more need for us.
Yeah.
But you have to be patient, not to, if you drag people too fast together, they resist more. You have to be very careful to work with the energy to slowly turn them back towards each other.
Mm.
And then, yes, so energy management was a beautiful topic because most managers will not think about that because of the connotations of that word.
Yeah, you just said, you mentioned that there's a greater need today because of how we experienced the global pandemic last year, and how it unfolded and how it impacted all aspects of our lives.
Hmm.
And how now, on the back of 2020 and moving into to the later half of the first half of 2021, I feel that there's, just in my personal experience with my network and the people that I'm working with, that there really is that need now to sort of bring people together. There's a need, because I think we're kind of a bit sick and tired of these polarized discussions and the polarized energy. Because at the end of the day, aren't we all social animals? And I think we've been so pulled apart, at least from where I'm sat. I don't know, maybe it's different from where you are, but just with the people that I've been speaking with, there is a need to sort of to pull everyone closer together and start creating a new vision, and
Hmm.
becoming and co-creating and collectively moving forward together, even if it's into the unknown. But I definitely feel that need and this energy, which is bringing, it's um, uh, a higher collective, so to speak,
Hmm.
collective consciousness, where there is that need.
And as you pull together your core group to do this, remember, you want people who do both action
Yeah.
with dream. If they, as you pull people together, make sure they back the story with action. They back the story with energy, not just with words, but with physical or constructive work.
Yeah, back the story, back the story.
Hmm.
So I think that's the motto, isn't it? So look around you, let's look around us. The organisations that we work for, that we work in, are they backing their story, or is their behaviour inconsistent? Okay, thank you so much, Casey. I love this session. I could talk for hours with you around this, particularly energy. And this is really a beautiful invitation from Casey for us all to connect with ourselves more, and to take that time to determine where we're at, and perhaps defer a decision or a choice in the case where our energy level is not at its optimum.
Mahalo and have a wonderful day, everyone. Aloha.
Bye, Casey. Thank you.
Bye.